What's going on, YouTube? It's your boy Lonnie Reacts. Today we back with another reaction video. Now this video is titled "The Entire Rise of the Inca Empire." Now this is the empire I have wanted to learn more about, and I think this will be a good video to do so. This is by the YouTuber History Dose, really good YouTuber. I really love his account, really love his videos. So as usual, I don't got too much to say. Let's just jump into the video and see what we can learn.
Strangers marched under hissing trees. Their spears and maces parted the brush, and shadows began to follow. Then the ambush. Arrows covered the warriors, who warded off the Amazonians with slings and piercing thrusts. When it was over, the travelers tended to the wounded and counted the dead. Warfare in the woodlands proved ever trying to the uninitiated. For this was a frontier, and the strangers were soldiers of Tawantinsuyu, the great Inca Empire, which stretched over all the land beyond, millions of varied peoples from the forest's edge to the desert coast, and from the southern plains to the high peaks, all of it connected by a vast system of roads overlooked by castles and monuments. The Inca dynasty hailed from the mountains. How they came to rule so much of the world was a story told to later chroniclers in various forms, threaded with legend and prophecy, and today further enlightened by the rocks and bones of that age. If tales of collapse demand attention, this is another story, one often neglected. This is the rise of the Inca Empire. One area of history it seems difficult to uncover is our own, the story of our ancestors. I partnered with MyHeritage, and even though my roots are kind of all over the world,
I gotta skip it.
Sent my great horizon and priceless. A free trial of my King Viracocha began to expand his modest kingdom through alliance and conflict, heeding the counsel of his court and the arcane wisdom of the oracles. The royal histories told that among his issue was a son, Inca Orco, whom he lavished with treasures, servants, and concubines. He denied all such luxury to his other son, for Inca Yapanki was wise, brave, and compassionate, and thus despised and envied by the king. Ordained by the gods to rule, Viracocha was eighth in the line of Inca kings, who in the previous 2 centuries came to rule the city of Cusco and its immediate surroundings. He desired that his favored son Inca Orco would one day succeed him, but the Incas had made enemies. A people called the Chancas declared war. Viracocha, Orco, and their men fled the city to fortified strongholds. Inca Yapanki remained, determined that the Golden City would not fall so long as he lived. In the mountains, a mighty contingent of the Chanca army marched toward Cusco and stormed down the Morning Hills, where Inca Yapanki and the defenders met them. It was said that the Creator God sent the Incas aid in the form of heavenly warriors. Blood covered the rocks, and at last, Inca Yapanki stood triumphant. He brought the treasures and prisoners of battle before his father so that the king could customarily display victory by treading on the vanquished. But Viracocha insisted Inca Orco perform the kingly honor, and Inca Yapanki departed in anger. Viracocha, suspicious of the rising status of his son Inca Yapanki, sent men to kill him, but the prince's loyal followers warned him and thwarted the attack. Inca Yapanki returned to Cusco with his men, whereupon 2 more divisions of Chancas attacked. The audacious prince struck down one of their commanders and caused the heads of their captains to be set on the points of lances and raised on high. The Chancas fled in fear, and Inca Yapanki publicly decorated Cusco with the flayed skins of their leaders, that all might see the valor of the Incas. This narrative served as a kind of foundational legend for the Incas, extolling the righteousness and divine favor of the prince. Whether Inca Yapanki had truly saved Cusco from a massive Chanca invasion is a matter of contention, but in some manner the young prince had shown his worth. Perhaps around the year 1438, Inca Yapanki received the sacred fringe of rulership about his head. As emperor or Sapa Inca, he took the name Pachacuti, which means roughly the change of time or the earth shaker. Pachacudi was indeed the herald of a new age. The deposed Viracocha had returned to the city in submission, and by one account, Inca Orco attempted to take Cusco and was slain by Pachacudi and his men. Pachacudi first oversaw the long renovation of Cusco. The city would stretch across the valley and support many thousands of people. Its urban center consisted of planned and paved roads which ran between temples, forts, and noble residences. Philosophers and great thinkers recorded history, recited sagas, and studied the stars. And the city plazas were hosts to the arts, dramatic plays, ballads, and sacred festivals. The first to accept the rule of Pachacudi were the neighboring mountain regions, where people guided llamas up misty passes tracing high into the cliffs. These were the common folk of the Andes, living as they had for millennia. The sun's daily trek over the peaks warmed the rocks and nourished the soil. Men and women cultivated crops, including maize, quinoa, and tubers such as potatoes. The Andean climate varies dramatically with elevation, so communities settled across altitudes to reap a variety of food and goods. Stone-sided terraces filled with gravel and soil converted slopes into arable land and retained heat and moisture, protecting crops against drought and mountain frost. They lived in stone dwellings. Men wore tunics, women dresses and sashes, complemented by overcloaks, while headdress varied by local custom. This clothing was largely spun from wool shorn from their llamas and alpacas, which, along with guinea pigs, provided meat. Communal support eased the burden of this life, but in the preceding centuries, warring, decentralized factions had raided and pillaged widely. Pachacudi now offered the people and their lords the security of the Inca Empire. By the ancient custom of reciprocity, peasants received safety and certain quantities of gifts or food from the state, and were in turn obliged to fulfill the mita, a taxation paid in labor. The Incas did not use currency. The head of each household typically owed the empire 2 to 3 months of labor, often farming, making textiles, or constructing imperial works. The Incas limited and rotated labor demands so as not to deprive communities of their self-sufficiency. And the empire demanded of its men an additional task: to fight for their king. Many lords would not willingly relinquish power to the Incas. While the chronology and details of Inca conquest differ in many accounts, a general picture of expansion emerges. Early in the reign of Pachacudi, a conqueror called Chuchicapac insisted that the so-called Earthshaker pay homage to him, whereafter he would use the skull of Pachacudi as a goblet from which to drink in triumph. Chuchicapac ruled the Coyas to the southeast. The undaunted Pachacudi would show them the power of the Incas. The army traversed the mountains in a raid for a pitched battle. The core warriors of Cusco wore helmets and carried shields made of thickly padded cloth, often reinforced with cane. But the Inca army largely consisted of less equipped commoners, sometimes using cloaks as shields. Maces, spears, halberds, clubs, and slings served as their principal weapons. At the opening of battles, rocks and javelins stunned the enemy before the Incas launched their direct assault, buttressed by divisions ready to attack flanks or act as reserves. The Coyas stood their ground for hours until Pachacudi and his guard cut through and captured Chuchicapac. The spirit of the enemy withered, and victory followed. The Incas generally spared captive soldiers, but they were less inclined to extend the same mercy to enemy commanders. Pachacudi and his army returned to Cusco and publicly beheaded Chuchicapac. Pachacudi had shaken the region, and many lords of the Altiplano submitted. Leaders who freely bent the knee would retain local rule and receive imperial privileges and rewards. Those who refused would suffer the Inca army, which at its peak could number more than 100,000 soldiers. Drawn up for battle, the Incas employed psychological warfare. One account recalled the Incas shouting, "We will drink from the skull of the traitor. We will adorn ourselves with a necklace of his teeth. We will play the melody of the pincuyu with flutes made from his bones. We will beat the drum made from his skin, and thus we will dance." Most enemies simply surrendered, and conquest proceeded without bloodshed. As the Incas marched into their new domains, they did not loot or massacre. Rather, Inca officials folded local leaders into the state apparatus, then constructed storehouses filled with massive stockpiles of food, drink, textiles, and other supplies, to be distributed as gifts for the loyal, provisions for those who served the state, or relief in times of famine. Many storehouses stood high on open hills, ever visible reminders of the prosperity and generosity of the Inca overlords. The emperor was styled Huactacoyac, lover and benefactor of the poor.
This is
Each
a
conquered
really
household
advanced
and lord was duly
civilization.
reported to Cusco. The Incas
It's
did not
crazy
use a
'cause a lot
written
of people,
alphabet or system of glyphs. Rather, people of a learned
like to
class
say,
recorded
Native
and relayed
Americans
information
really
with
weren't doing
quipus,
shit.
knotted cords of various colors attached to a central cord. Understood in the context of its message, the placement of knots and colors encoded precise information. Officials thereby recorded history, kept inventories of storehouses, took a regular census of the imperial population, and delivered news to and from the warfront. Having brought low the Koyas in the southern dominions, Pachacuti had consolidated his hold on the revered Lake Titicaca. It was here that the Incas believed the creator god named Viracocha brought into existence the sun, moon, and stars. The Incas fervently venerated the sun god Inti, but recognized Viracocha as the original cause of all things, who imbued the world with light, knowledge, and order. It was this creator god who was believed to have sculpted statues at the lakeside ruins which so captured Inca imagination. These monuments, gateways, and abandoned temples were in fact the vestiges of the long-dead Tiwanaku civilization, which urbanized in the 4th century and steadily expanded. For the Incas did not represent some sudden ascent from a static past of humble villages. The Andean region had flourished as a cradle of complex states and urban centers for millennia. On the coast, the ancient Nazca Confederation erected great cities and marked the desert floor with colossal drawings of animals and people. And the great Moche civilization constructed pyramids that now sloped in the sun, their kings entombed with their treasures like the pharaohs of old. Portrait vessels displayed the Moche mastery of artistic naturalism, each wrinkle and subtle expression of an ancient people preserved in ceramic. Most of the great polities declined, and by 1000 AD, valleys were abandoned and raiding dominated the fractured Andes. Now, in the middle of the 15th century, only one power remained that could resist the growing empire of Pachacuti. The Timor Empire held dominion over 1 million people along the sandy coast. High walls and statues framed its sprawling capital of Chanchan, whose irrigated farms, streets, and temples may have supported some 30,000 inhabitants. Undeterred, Pachacuti conquered northwest through the Peruvian Sierra and along the coast. On one of several northern campaigns, Pachacuti sent a gallant young commander, his son, Tupac Yupanqui. The Incas conducted espionage before campaigns, identifying enemy vulnerabilities and making clay models of the terrain ahead. And so Prince Tupac Yupanqui led the army through high and arid lands, securing submission and storming forts until, when the Chimus were nearly surrounded, Tupac Yupanqui trailed down the Moche River and threatened to block the coastal water supply. The complete surrender of the Timor Empire appears to have been gradual and hard-fought, but in time they submitted to the Incas. Tupac Yupanqui returned to Cusco with many Chimu artisans, renowned for their silver and goldsmithing and their work in textiles and ceramics. More than any of the emperor's sons, Tupac Yupanqui had proven himself a warrior of tenacity and cunning, qualities paramount for the defense and expansion of the Inca world. Pachacuti named him as his eventual heir and may have begun to jointly rule the empire with him. With the labor of the conquered, the state produced bountiful harvests of maize and coca and built great marvels. Royal estates likely built under Pachacuti included the sublime Ollantaytambo, and a mountaintop settlement later known as Machu Picchu.
Machu Picchu.
There, clouds drifted among temples and residences, with trapezoidal windows and doors, much of it built of stones hewn so perfectly together that a knife's edge could not fit between them. Cool spring water trickled down the stone aqueducts of Machu Picchu, reaching first the royal baths and pooling out from fountains. All across the empire, the Incas constructed aqueducts and canals that irrigated farmland and routed water into settlements. Moreover, they connected the western edge of the continent like never before. At its height, the Inca road network measured an estimated 25,000 miles, linking the desert, mountains, and jungle. In certain stretches, it was finely paved, with stairs that climbed steep bluffs and walls, drains, and culverts to prevent erosion where needed. Simpler roads branched off to mountain shrines, mines, and settlements. Chasms were surmounted by woven bridges. This ambitious empire most of all demanded speed and communication. The Incas established a system of thousands of messengers or chasquis of impressive stamina, who perpetually manned waypoints at every 5 miles or so along the main roads. The previous runner signaled his arrival with a conch shell, related his message verbatim, and often delivered a quipu. In this manner, Inca messages could travel some 170 miles in 24 hours. Communication that took weeks by horseback in the colonial era, the chasqui system accomplished in mere days. This burgeoning system enabled seasoned Inca generals to lead armies on campaigns of conquest or consolidation. Tupac Yupanqui's travels along the coast brought him to the foot of the enemy fortress of Ungara. Their stones and lances repelled his attacks, and he pulled back. When the defenders left to celebrate their triumph, the concealed Incas slaughtered them on the coast and adorned the fortress with the swaying bodies of the enemy. To ensure loyalty after conquests, the Incas seized local items of worship to be held in Cusco. The captive relics thereby dissuaded rebellion and made the capital a place of pilgrimage. As the years passed, the armies of Pachacuti also conquered far north into the trying terrain of Ecuador. Tupac Yupanqui and his men came to the island of Puna, where chronicles relate he encountered merchants on sailing rafts who told him of distant populated islands they had visited. Tupac Yupanqui was said to have undertaken a 9-month voyage and returned with people and goods. Though the account may have been apocryphal, later writers speculated that he had reached the Galapagos or even Rapa Nui, known as Easter Island. Genetic and floral evidence do indicate that Polynesians made contact with South Americans before European arrival. Whether the Incas participated is much less certain. Tupac Yupanqui and his massive Inca armies were most accustomed to long journeys by land. The Incas forbade their soldiers to loot the innocent countryside, and so a large fraction of military caravans comprised porters and llamas to haul provisions. Along the way, settlements were to support the armies, and at regular intervals along the road, the Incas installed storehouses full of weapons, clothing, and food. People of the Andes preserved certain foods by an ancient method of freeze-drying that combined dehydration and exposure to the elements. Freeze-dried meat was called charqui, the origin of the word jerky. After one arduous march east, Tupac Yupanqui and the Incas entered the Amazon. Nectarous flora and curious creatures enthralled the Incas, but the woods were also home to innumerable people. Conquest proceeded more simply where large polities could surrender on behalf of vast regions. The forest was different. Minor victories nonetheless earned the Incas colorful feathers, gold and honey, and new subjects. Expansion diversified the Inca army, which came to include bowmen of the forest and troops of the desert. Hardly monolithic, the empire would include millions of people of varied traditions and faiths, who spoke over 150 languages. The Incas, for their part, spoke Quechua and enshrined the language as an imperial lingua franca. According to the Incas, their conquests were in part driven by an imperative to civilize the world. Beyond their state religion, they observed well-defined ethics and norms. They condemned cannibalism and the consumption of dog meat. They punished adultery and suspected witchcraft and exalted family. A growing population strengthened the empire. In some regions, provincial governors arranged marriages between unmarried commoners. It was perhaps after his first foray into the Amazon that Tupac Yupanqui returned to the aging Pachacuti, who told him, "Son, you now see how many great nations I leave to you, and you know what labor they have cost me. Mind that you are the man to keep and expand them. When I am dead, take care of my body, that I may go to rest with my father, the sun." The passing of the great emperor Pachacuti sent a tremor through a world suffused with divine will and ancestral spirits. The Incas marked his death by offering to the gods that which was most precious to them. Treasures were buried or destroyed, thousands of llamas slaughtered, and hundreds of people sacrificed. Youths from across the empire who would join their king in death. Sacrifice had been practiced for millennia in Andean societies, and though the Incas did not practice it on a consistent or massive scale, they turned to it in times of natural disaster and changes of rulership. The story of Pachacuti did not end with his death. The Incas believed the dead took another form, that their essence remained bound to the body. The mummies of former kings and queens continued to inhabit estates, attended to by their kin, and consulted by shamans on imperial affairs. Even so, active kingship passed to Tupac Yupanqui, who mourned his father and then mustered his troops to return with renewed vigor to the jungle. Despair and confusion awaited them. The stories told that the forests were very dense and full of evil places, so that they could not force their way through, nor did they know what direction to take. The Sapa Inca would secure the submission of many, but skirmish and sickness hounded their stray march, until at length a general rescued the lost emperor. In his absence, the Coyas had led a revolt, slaying Inca officials and retreating to forts. In times of rebellion, smoke signals could rapidly alert the empire of crisis. Tupac swiftly raised an army tens of thousands strong, crushed the Coyas, and turned the skins of their captains into drums. Most conquered territories were subject to the mitma, the mass resettlement policy of the Incas. The empire forcibly moved hundreds of thousands of people. Segments of rebellious populations like the Coyas were scattered from their homelands, loyal subjects sent to replace them. Other populations were simply moved in order to work less cultivated regions. The rebellions quelled, it may have been then that Tupac Yupanqui conquered into Argentina and far into Chile, halting only around the Maule River. Some records indicated that there the Incas clashed with the mighty Mapuche people in a costly multi-day battle. Whether weakened by the march or warfare, Tupac Yupanqui turned his armies back. The Incas called their growing empire Tawantinsuyu, the land of the four quarters. Each of these parts was managed by a governor, with lower officials overseeing the over 80 provinces across the empire. This refined system of governance managed the labor of hundreds of thousands of subjects. Boundless were the brilliant textiles, gold, food, and drink that flowed into the capital and other principal cities. In Cusco, Tupac Yupanqui continued the construction of great works, including Sacsayhuaman, a soaring temple or fortress comprising a tower and elaborate buildings, atop several levels of cyclopean walls, made from colossal boulders cut, pulled, and by some ingenious process, elevated and impeccably fitted together. Decades later, a European visitor would write it was the greatest castle his countrymen had ever laid eyes on, and these walls are the most beautiful thing that can be seen of all the constructions. They are of such big stones that no one who sees them would say that they have been placed there by the hand of man. As Tupac Yupanqui well knew, his powerful throne was to one day pass from father to son. While a Sapa Inca would marry many secondary wives for purposes of alliance, he was to devote himself to a queen who wielded influence and whose children alone could be legitimate heirs. Intimate relations between cousins or closer relatives were forbidden to commoners, but among the royals it strengthened familial power and security. Tupac years before took as his primary wife his own full sister, Mama Okyo, who bore him a capable son named Huayna Capac. Upon the death of the great conqueror Tupac Yupanqui around the year 1493, the royal bloodline was spilled in a struggle for succession, until at last Huayna Capac emerged as the new Sapa Inca. He ordered campaigns in the east and far north, and led armies against rebellious peoples. When he advanced on a citadel of intransigent people in the north, he was thrown from his litter and nearly fell into the hands of the enemy. The shame was avenged in short order. The Incas chased these enemies to the water's edge and massacred them, such that thereafter the lake was called Yawarcucha, the Lake of Blood. Huayna Capac devoted his years of rule most of all to maintaining the empire. On high hills, vigilant forts stood against the harrying raids of border peoples. The Incas had conquered the sands, mountains, the grassy valleys, and the edge of the jungle, and found no power that threatened Cusco. These were the days of the Pax Incaica, a land once dominated by fractious warfare, now a vast corridor of imposed peace. Inca rule, which at once resettled, dominated, and demanded of its people, also brought forth prosperity. High yields of crops, infrastructure, and a stable safety for the common family. Perhaps it was by the audacity and brilliance of Pachacuti and his sons that the Incas of Cusco came to rule so extensive a domain. But this was a grand and mighty empire, inhabited, defended, and built by millions of people. Sometime after the year 1520, a foul pestilence began to sweep across the land. It claimed the life of Huayna Capac and his designated heir. Many believe that this was a wave of smallpox from a faraway instance of contact with people of a distant world. Late in the reign of Huayna Capac, there had been folk of a pale countenance seen along the imperial borders. Now, as the plague-stricken Incas fell into a civil war for the throne, more were coming. The vanguard of an unknown empire, the Swords of Spain. Before you head out, another thanks to...
Just had to come and ruin it. Just had to come and ruin it. Wow. That was pretty cool to learn about the Inca Empire. Very advanced civilization. Very capable, very strong, very powerful civilization. As you can see, they conquered down near the whole western coast of the South Americas. So, damn, that's nice. I wonder how wealthy the empire would have been. Did they trade with the Northern Americas, empires of the North America? Excuse me. I don't really know about empires of North America. I like to know about them too. But that was a pretty good video. Tupac was a really good general, really good king. I'm glad that his father stopped being petty and actually chose him as the heir. I'm glad. I'm glad that happened. I'm glad his father realized, okay, he's a really capable heir, and he can really lead this kingdom. So I'm glad that was cool to know. It's also cool that they had all these reforms to sustain their empire until the I think there was the Spanish. Yeah, the Spanish came. Man, well, that was a pretty good video, and I'd love to watch some more videos on Native American history. And if you like this video, please like and please subscribe, and I'll see y'all next time.